Why did the teacher pause when she walked into the room, like he suddenly sensed something about her he couldn't name? Bate Cooper didn't notice. Or maybe she did and simply pretended she didn't. Pretending had become a kind of survival these past few years, a quiet skill she'd mastered long after she mastered flying a machine that could tear the sky in half. She stood in the doorway of the faculty conference room, hands cold, shoulders tight, trying to blend into walls that kept reminding her she didn't belong. But belonging wasn't her mission, not anymore. She'd only meant to sit in the back, observe, stay quiet. She wasn't here to make noise. She wasn't here to rewrite reputations or correct anyone's assumptions about the cafeteria lady. She was here because Hannah, her daughter, the one person she never allowed herself to fail, was starting to come home with questions no 8-year-old should ask. Why do kids laugh at me? Why do they say my mom only works in the kitchen because she isn't smart enough to be anything else? Bate could survive contempt, she survived worse. But Hannah, no, a child shouldn't learn cruelty before multiplication. So she'd come to this meeting. She showed up because showing up was what she knew how to do, even when it meant standing in a room full of people who didn't understand her quiet, or her posture, or the way she watched every exit without knowing she was doing it. She took the empty seat near the door, placing her notebook carefully on the table like it were something fragile. She expected to sit through the whole meeting unnoticed. That illusion lasted about 7 seconds. So Richard Dawson drawled from the far side of the table, "This should be interesting." The other teachers turned only slightly, just enough to look at her, not enough to acknowledge her. That was always the pattern. Polite smiles, distant nods, a silent agreement that she was part of the staff but not part of them. Bate kept her gaze on the table, tracing the scratches etched into the surface by years of bored students and restless hands. Her breathing stayed steady, controlled. She learned that in a cockpit, too, stay calm, stay level, stay ahead of the moment. Principal Morgan cleared her throat to begin the meeting. Veterans Day Assembly, guest speakers, color guard, logistics, the usual agenda items, but Bate felt pressure building behind her ribs in slow, steady increments, like she was flying into headwinds no one else could feel. Then Dawson said it. "We need actual veterans speaking at the assembly, not just people who married one." Silence tipped into something sharp. Bate looked up. His smirk was small but satisfied. He wanted a reaction. He wanted proof she was what he assumed, small, embarrassed, unsure. She didn't give him that satisfaction. She simply folded her hands in her lap, knuckles pale, and waited for the moment to pass. It didn't. "So Bate," Dawson continued, "your husband served, right? Army, Navy, something like that." "He was Navy," Bate said softly. "Oh, you must have been proud. And I assume you were at home during his deployments." "Yes," she said, because that was partly true. She had been at home, sometimes. But she'd spent just as many nights at 40,000 feet above hostile terrain, flying missions nobody in this building would ever hear about. "So second-hand experience," Dawson concluded with a shrug. "Still, every bit counts, I guess." Bate felt the words land not on her but on the memory of the man in the photograph on her bookshelf. David, dress blues, soft smile, gone in a flash of fire mid-sky, second-hand experience. The absurdity was almost laughable. But she stayed silent. Because silence is what you choose when the truth is too heavy to hold up without breaking something. Principal Morgan moved on, outlining seating arrangements and microphone setup. Teachers scribbled notes, but Bate barely heard anything. Her gaze drifted to the window. She watched the Texas sunlight spill across the courtyard, bright, unforgiving, honest. It reminded her of the desert sky she used to fly under. The heat, the glare, the constant edge between control and chaos. And then something strange happened. "Do we have any veterans among staff?" Morgan asked, scanning the room. A few teachers shook their heads. Someone mentioned a husband. Someone else mentioned a brother. Morgan kept scanning. Her eyes landed on Bate. For one impossible second, the room felt suspended. "Bate," Morgan said gently, "your file says you have military experience. Would you want to participate?" Dozens of eyes turned to her again, curious now, not dismissive. She could have said no. It would have been safer, easier. She could have stayed the anonymous cafeteria worker with hair pulled back into a tight ponytail and hands rough from industrial soap. She could have stayed invisible and no one would blame her. But then she remembered Hannah. Hannah standing small on the playground. Hannah clutching a jumped rope with frayed ends. Hannah asking why kids laughed when she said her mom was her hero. And something in Bate shifted quietly, like a switch flipping in her chest. "I did serve," Bate said. "Doing what?" Dawson asked, amused. She lifted her chin. "Naval aviation." The words dropped into the room like a stone into still water, ripples freezing every face in place. "Naval aviation," Dawson repeated like she'd spoken a foreign language. "Yes." "So what? Administrative support, logistics, something like that?" "Aviation means flying," said Angela, the third-grade teacher, her voice soft but cutting. Bate could feel her pulse, slow and heavy in her throat. "What did you fly?" Dawson pushed. It was supposed to be the question that exposed her. "FA-18 Super Hornets," she said. And for the first time since she'd walked into this building 3 years ago, the room truly stopped. Every breath, every whisper, every doubt stopped. She didn't look at Dawson. She didn't need to. She knew the expression he wore, the one men always wore when they realized the world was bigger than their assumptions. She expected disbelief. She expected laughter. She expected questions she wasn't ready to answer. But what she didn't expect was the conference room door to open. A tall man stepped inside wearing Air Force dress blues. Silver eagles glinted on his shoulders. Colonel Anthony Shaw. And the moment his eyes found her, something in his face changed, recognition struggling to form into words. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said politely. "Is this the staff meeting?" "Yes," Morgan said, standing quickly. "Colonel Shaw, we." But Shaw didn't look at the principal. He looked only at Bate. "Ma'am," his brow furrowed, "forgive me, but have we met?" The room waited, held breath, trembled on the edge of a truth none of them saw coming. Bate felt her pulse kick. She felt her chest tighten. She felt the old world she'd buried begin to rise like smoke from a long-extinguished fire. "No, sir," she said quietly. "I don't believe we have." But Shaw wasn't convinced. He took a step closer. "Navy aviation." "Yes, sir." "What squadron?" She hesitated, only for a second. "VFA 41, she whispered. And that was when Colonel Shaw froze. Like someone had just spoken the name of a ghost. Like he'd suddenly realized the quiet, tired woman standing in front of him wasn't just another staff member. She was someone else. Someone the military remembered. Someone who had once flown into the kind of danger only a handful of people in the world could understand. His voice barely made it out. "Ma'am, what was your call sign?" Bate felt the floor tilt under her feet. This was the moment she'd spent years running from. This was the truth she'd buried so deep, she almost convinced herself it belonged to a different lifetime. She looked at Shaw. She looked at the teachers. She looked at the man who mocked her. And then she said the two words that would change everything. "Lone Eagle." The sound hit the room like a shockwave, silent at first, then devastating. Bate didn't flinch, didn't move, didn't breathe. But inside her, something she thought had died long ago took its first small breath again. What made him stand so quickly? Respect or disbelief? Colonel Shaw looked like a man who'd stumbled across a legend he never expected to see alive, much less wearing a school ID badge and cafeteria shoes. He didn't speak at first. He just stared, as if trying to match the tired mother in front of him with the impossible call sign echoing in his memory. Lone Eagle. The name had weight, the kind that traveled across bases in quiet conversations, the kind whispered by pilots who understood what it meant to survive the kind of mission she'd flown. Dawson's face was draining of color, a slow collapse of certainty. Principal Morgan pressed her hand to her chest. "Mrs. Cooper, is this true?" Bate didn't look at any of them. Her eyes stayed on Shaw, the only person in the room who knew the full gravity of what she just said. "Yes, ma'am," she answered softly, "it's true." The room stayed silent long enough for Bate to hear the faint hum of the air conditioner, the distant sound of children laughing on the playground, the quickened beat of her own pulse. And then Shaw stepped forward. "It's an honor, ma'am," he said, voice low with sincerity. "A genuine honor." He saluted. It wasn't ceremony. It wasn't politeness. It was recognition. And Bate, who had not stood at attention in 3 years, rose instinctively, returning the salute as though her body had been waiting for the command her mind refused to acknowledge. Her fingertips trembled when she lowered her hand, not from fear, from memory. She sat back down slowly, aware of every eye in the room, some wide with awe, some ashamed, some scrambling to reconcile who they thought she was with who she had just proven herself to be. Dawson was the first to speak. "No," he said quietly, shaking his head. "No, this is ridiculous." His voice cracked like old plaster. She works in the cafeteria, she. "Yes," Shaw cut in sharply. "And she's also one of the most decorated female combat pilots in modern naval aviation." "How do you know that?" Dawson demanded, desperate now. "How can you possibly?" "Because," Shaw said, "I pulled the mission reports from 2019 myself." Principal Morgan leaned forward slowly. "What mission?" Shaw looked around the table, as though unsure whether he was allowed to speak of it, and finally rested his eyes on Bate. "Ma'am, I won't go into classified details without your consent." "You can share what's public," Bate said softly. Shaw nodded. "The Lone Eagle Rescue," he began. Angela's breath hitched, even she had heard of it. "During Operation Resolute Guardian," Shaw continued, 12 of our guys were trapped behind enemy lines after a downed helicopter, surrounded, outnumbered, running out of time." He paused. "Command labeled the extraction impossible." Bates stared at the table. She could still feel it. The radio static, the shaking metal beneath her gloves. The second her co-pilot's voice died mid-transmission. The moment she realized she was alone. Shaw's voice softened. But one pilot refused to accept that. He looked at her like he was seeing the sky open again. She flew a damaged Super Hornet solo into active fire. No wingman, no escort, no margin for error. She engaged hostile ground forces, located our men, coordinated rescue timing, and held the line until helicopters reached the extraction point. Shaw swallowed. 12 men came home alive that day. 12. The silence that followed was thicker than grief, thicker than disbelief. It was reverence. For the first time, Bate looked up and realized every teacher in the room had shifted. Posture straightened, eyes softened, expressions full of something that went beyond respect. It was apology. Dawson couldn't breathe, his jaw trembled. "You're Lone Eagle." "Yes. But why are you here?" "Because my daughter needed a mother more than the Navy needed another pilot." He stared at her like she'd spoken another language, like he couldn't comprehend choosing quiet over glory. Morgan exhaled shakily. "Mrs. Cooper, Bate, why didn't you tell us?" "Because it wasn't relevant to the job," Bate said simply. "And because I needed peace, for me, for Hannah." Shaw nodded as if he understood more deeply than anyone else ever could. "You left after your husband died," he said, voice low but respectful. "Yes." "It wasn't failure," Shaw said softly. It was sacrifice. Bate pressed her lips together. She didn't want sympathy. She didn't want her grief dissected on a conference room table beneath fluorescent lights. She didn't want to be the woman everyone suddenly treated differently. But she also didn't want Hannah to keep hiding who her mother was. Morgan took a deep breath and regained composure. "Colonel, we would be honored if Mrs. Cooper participated in the assembly." Bates' chest tightened. She wasn't ready. She wasn't prepared. She wasn't sure she ever would be. But Shaw placed a gentle hand on the chair beside him. "You don't owe anyone a speech," he said. "You don't owe anyone your story, but—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There are little girls in this school who need to know this is possible. That women can be warriors and mothers. That courage doesn't disappear just because life changes." Bate felt something break inside her. Not pain. Recognition. She thought of Hannah, sitting alone at lunch while Kevin Dawson bragged about his father's military near-career. She thought of the jump rope thrown over the fence, the questions, the doubt in those bright young eyes. She thought of all the times she'd swallowed her own name, afraid of how heavy it was. "Mrs. Cooper," Angela said softly, leaning forward, "if you spoke at that assembly, Hannah would never be mocked again." Bate looked at her hands, the same hands that once fired missiles, adjusted throttles, saved lives. They were rough now from steel trays and cleaning solutions, but they were still hers. Still capable. Still steady. "I'll consider it," she said. It was the only answer she had. When the meeting ended, teachers filed out in stunned silence. Some approached her awkwardly with gratitude, some with apologies, some with questions they didn't dare ask yet. Dawson didn't speak. He left the room quickly, shoulders tight, face burning with humiliation. Shaw lingered. "You did good, ma'am," he said quietly. "You handled that with more grace than most men I've met." "Grace," Bate echoed with a humorless smile. "That wasn't grace, that was restraint." Shaw chuckled. "Well, whatever it was, I'm grateful." Bate tightened her grip on her notebook. "I don't want this to change anything for Hannah." "It already has," Shaw said gently. "She's about to discover her mother was never small. The world just didn't know how to see her." Bate opened her mouth, but a voice cut through the hallway. "Mrs. Cooper." Angela stood there, breathless. "It's Hannah." Bate froze. "What about her?" "She's outside the classroom, crying." The world shifted under her feet. She was out the door before anyone else could react. Shaw, Angela, Morgan, all left behind as she moved with mission-trained instinct, sprinting down the hallway toward her daughter. Not a pilot. Not a legend. Not a call sign. Just a mother. The only mission that ever truly mattered. Why was Hannah crying? Was it fear, embarrassment, or something Bate wasn't ready to hear? She reached the end of the hallway in seconds, heart pounding in a way no cockpit alarm had ever managed to provoke. A child's sob echoed faintly, thin and shaky, the sound slicing through every defense she'd ever built. Hannah sat on the floor outside her classroom, knees pulled to her chest, small hands covering her eyes. Her pink backpack slumped against the wall beside her like it had given up under its own weight. "Honey," Bate whispered, dropping to her knees. Hannah looked up, cheeks streaked with tears, lower lip trembling. "Mom." Bate pulled her close instantly. Hannah buried her face in her mother's shoulder and Bate closed her eyes, inhaling the faint scent of strawberry shampoo and crayons. Something safe, something worth fighting worlds for. "What happened?" Bate murmured, stroking her daughter's hair. Hannah hiccuped. Kevin said you're lying." Bate's stomach tightened. "He said you're not a pilot," Hannah continued. "He said you're just a lunch lady, and he said his dad told him that people like you pretend to be soldiers to feel important." Bate felt the weight of those words like incoming fire, not because they hurt her but because they hurt Hannah. a pain she couldn't deflect, couldn't outfly, couldn't outmaneuver. She held Hannah tighter. "I'm so sorry." "I told him you were brave," Hannah whispered. "I told him you flew planes, real ones, but he laughed and said girls can't fly fighter jets." Bates' throat closed. Girls can't. She'd heard that once too, in a far colder room, from a man with decorations on his chest and doubt in his eyes. "It's okay," Bate whispered, though the words tasted wrong. "You did nothing wrong." "But was he right?" Hannah asked, looking up with eyes so wide they seemed almost breakable. "Did you lie?" The world paused. A long, heavy silence settled between them as Bate cupped her daughter's face gently. "No," she said, "I never lied, I just didn't tell everyone everything." "Why?" Bate hesitated. "How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes silence is the only safe place to hide the parts of yourself that the world hasn't earned? Why do you bury your wings? Why do you clip your own legend down to something manageable? Why do you trade glory for peace? You know how some stories hurt," Bates said softly, "and some memories are too big to carry every day." Hannah nodded slowly. "I needed time," Bates said. "Time to heal, time to be your mom, and some people don't understand that. They think strength is loud, but sometimes strength is quiet." Hannah leaned into her. "Mom, I don't want you to be quiet anymore." Bate felt her heart break open in a way that wasn't pain, it was clarity. Her daughter wasn't asking for a hero. She was asking for truth. Angela arrived at the end of the hallway, slowing when she saw the two of them. She didn't speak. She simply leaned against the wall, giving them space while keeping watch like a silent perimeter. Bate rubbed Hannah's back. "Can you tell me exactly what Kevin said?" Hannah nodded. "He said his dad told him you pretended to be a pilot to impress people, and that there's no way a mom like you could do anything dangerous." Bates' jaw clenched involuntarily just for a moment. Not anger, resolve. She lifted Hannah's chin gently. "Sweetheart, do you remember the picture on my shelf? The one with the big gray plane behind me? The one with the helmet?" "Yes." "That was you." Bate nodded. "That was me." Hannah blinked. Something like awe and something like relief washed across her face, as if she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "And my call sign," Bate added softly, "was Lone Eagle." Hannah's mouth parted. "That's real." "It's real." She didn't tell her daughter what the name meant. Not yet. Not how you earn something like that. Not what it costs. But she saw pride bloom on Hannah's face. Bright, warm, and fragile in the way all children's emotions are. Bate kissed her forehead. "I will talk to Kevin's father, and he will not speak to you like that again." Angela finally stepped forward. "Bate, the principal wants to speak with you when you're ready." Bate nodded. "Thank you." Hannah pulled back slightly. "Am I in trouble?" "No," Bate said firmly. "You're brave, you told the truth, that's never wrong." Hannah wiped her cheeks with her sleeve, then looked up shyly. "Can I tell the class you were a real pilot?" Bate hesitated. She saw Hannah's hope. She saw her daughter wanting to belong. Wanting her mother to stand tall so she could stand tall too. Bate brushed a strand of hair behind Hannah's ear. "If I speak at the assembly, everyone will know." Hannah's eyes widened. "You'll speak." "I think," Bate said slowly, "it's time." Angela smiled softly. "The whole school will lose their minds." Bate stood, helping Hannah up. "Let's go talk to Principal Morgan." As they walked down the hall, Bate felt something shift deep inside her. A door she'd locked long ago had opened, not with force but with necessity. She didn't feel like Lone Eagle. She didn't feel like a warrior. She felt like a mother doing what mothers have done since the beginning of time, protecting their child with truth when silence no longer worked. They reached the office where Morgan, Shaw, and two teachers waited. The room straightened when Bates stepped in, something subtle, something unspoken. She wasn't just the cafeteria worker anymore, but she wasn't the legend either. She was something in between, something more human. Morgan stepped forward gently. "Bate, are you okay?" Bate nodded. "My daughter is, that's what matters." Shaw glanced at Hannah, then at Bate. "Would you like me to speak with Kevin's father, as an officer?" Bate considered it. The offer held weight, but this wasn't a mission chain, it wasn't command structure. This was her daughter's school, her life, her peace. "No," she said calmly, "I need to handle this myself." Shaw nodded, respect in his eyes. "Understood." Morgan cleared her throat. "About the assembly, do you feel ready to speak?" Bates' gaze drifted to Hannah, who squeezed her hand tightly. "Yes," she said, "I'll speak." A quiet ripple passed through the room, relief, admiration, anticipation. Hannah tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, can I sit in the front row?" "Yes, sweetheart," Bate whispered, "you can." And then, as if remembering something, Hannah leaned close, voice barely above a breath. "What are you gonna tell them?" Bate looked down at her daughter, small, hopeful, brave in ways she didn't even understand yet. And Bate answered softly, "The truth." Angela wiped her eyes discreetly. Shaw looked proud. Morgan nodded in silent approval. But Bate wasn't looking at any of them. She was remembering the feeling of dawn light over the carrier deck, the weight of the helmet in her hands, the moment before a mission when everything in the world froze. She used to fly into danger for men she'd never met. Now she would speak for one little girl she loved more than life itself. And somehow this felt harder. This felt heavier. This felt like the real mission. What did a mother say to a man who'd taught his child to mock hers? Bate wasn't sure, but as she walked toward the pickup loop at the end of the school day, she felt the old steadiness returning, the kind she used to feel before throttle up, right before the sky split open around her. Not adrenaline, not anger. Purpose. Hannah held her hand, swinging it slightly the way children do when they've already forgiven the world. Bate envied that innocence. She wished she could borrow even a piece of it for what was about to happen. Kevin was waiting near the flagpole, kicking pebbles with his shoe. His father stood behind him, a tall man with broad shoulders and a posture that tried too hard. His sunglasses were the expensive the kind men bought when they wanted authority without earning it. He saw Bate approaching. His jaw tightened. Hannah squeezed her mother's fingers. "That's him," she whispered. Bate nodded once. "You can wait with Angela, sweetheart." Angela, who'd walked out with them for backup, placed a gentle hand on Hannah's shoulder and guided her a few steps away. Leave it to teachers to form an unbreakable line when children were involved. Bate approached the man. He didn't speak. He didn't offer a courtesy greeting. He didn't even pretend. He simply crossed his arms. "So you're the one causing all this drama." Bate breathed out slowly. "Your son upset my daughter." "My son told the truth," the man snapped. "He said what I told him. People who work in cafeterias love to pretend they were something more. It's pathetic, really." Bate didn't flinch. "I didn't pretend anything." "You sure about that?" he challenged, stepping closer. "Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone making up stories for attention." The air around them shifted. Parents picking up their children slowed just slightly, not enough to stare, but enough to sense something unfolding. Bate studied him. Not to intimidate him. Not to measure him as an opponent. But to understand who she was speaking to. This wasn't about military service. This wasn't about rumors. This was about a man who needed to feel bigger than someone else. "Your son called my daughter a liar," Bates said calmly. "He told her that girls can't fly fighter jets." "That's because they can't," the man said with a shrug. "Everyone knows that." Bates exhaled. Not anger. Sadness. Not for herself. For him. For his son. For the smallness he taught. "You're wrong," she said quietly, "and your son deserves better." He scoffed. "Please, what you're going to tell me you're some kind of pilot, that you flew missions? Come on, be serious." Bate heard footsteps approaching behind her. She didn't turn, but she knew who it was. Colonel Shaw stepped beside her, with a stillness that made the man in sunglasses stiffen instinctively. "Sir," Shaw said politely, "before you continue, you should know you're speaking to one of the most capable naval aviators I've ever read a mission report on." The man blinked. "Who are you supposed to be?" Shaw removed his sunglasses, revealing the silver eagle insignia on his uniform. The father's posture wilted. "I'm Colonel Anthony Shaw," he said, "United States Air Force." Silence spread across the pickup loop. More parents slowed now, just enough to sense the gravity. The father cleared his throat. "Well, that doesn't prove anything." Shaw's voice remained controlled. "Mrs. Cooper's service record is classified, but what I can say is that I've worked with pilots for 28 years, and I can count on one hand the number of people whose names carry the level of respect hers does." Bate closed her eyes briefly, not in pride, in discomfort. She hated that her past had to be dragged into daylight like this. "Ma'am," Shaw added, "would you like me to show him the unclassified commendation?" Bate nodded once. Shaw pulled a folded sheet of paper from his breast pocket. He'd printed it earlier, clearly anticipating something like this. He handed it to the father. The man scanned it, his tan face draining of color. Navy Commendation Medal with Combat Distinguishing Device. Distinguished Flying Cross. Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism. His eyes stopped at one line. For actions conducted under the call sign, Lone Eagle. He looked up, suddenly small. "You, that's you." "Yes," Bates said softly. The man swallowed hard. I didn't know." "You didn't need to know," Bate replied. "My daughter just needed your son not to be cruel." His shoulders sagged, shame replacing the arrogance he'd worn like armor. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "I'll talk to Kevin." Bate nodded, "Thank you." But before she could turn away, he surprised her. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked. It wasn't mocking, it wasn't hostile, it was genuine confusion. Why hide all of that? Bate thought for a moment before answering. "Because after I lost my husband," she said slowly, "I needed a life without danger, without noise, without everyone expecting me to be strong all the time." She glanced toward Hannah, who was watching from Angela's side with wide, hopeful eyes. "And because my daughter deserved a mom who wasn't carrying war into the house every night." The man nodded, swallowing hard. "I get that more than you know." Maybe he did, maybe he didn't, it didn't matter. Bate turned to Shaw. "Thank you for stepping in." "You didn't need me," Shaw said, "but I'm glad I was here." As the father left with Kevin, hand on his son's shoulder, posture subdued, Bate walked back toward Hannah. The moment their eyes met, Hannah ran to her. "You okay now?" Bate asked gently. Hannah nodded. "What did he say?" "That he understands," Bate said, "and that he won't talk about you or me that way again." Hannah hugged her tightly. Bate lifted her off the ground, pressing a kiss into her hair. Then Angela approached, smiling. "That was impressive." Bate let out a slow breath. "I didn't want it to be a scene." "It wasn't," Angela said. "It was truth." They started walking toward the parking lot. Hannah swung her mother's hand again. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart." "Are you nervous about speaking at the assembly?" Bate hesitated. She had flown into missile fire. She had survived being the last aircraft in the sky. She had stared death in the face and pushed back with engines screaming. But this felt different. "Yes," she admitted softly, "a little." Hannah grinned. "It's okay, I get nervous too." Bate laughed quietly, the tension easing from both their shoulders. As they reached the car, Bate looked back at the school. At the windows reflecting the setting sun, at the flag rustling in the soft wind, at the place where she tried to live a small life and failed because the world refused to stay quiet. Tomorrow would come. The assembly would come. The truth would come. And for the first time in years, she felt ready. Not as a pilot, not as a legend, as a mother who finally stopped running from her own name. What did a person say the night before they stepped back into a world they'd walked away from? Bate wasn't sure. The house was quiet after dinner, too quiet. Hannah had fallen asleep early on the couch, curled under a blanket with her stuffed owl tucked under her chin. The TV flickered softly, casting a warm glow across her small face. Bate stood in the doorway, watching her breathe. Tomorrow was the assembly. Tomorrow she would speak. Tomorrow her silence would end. The thought both steadied and unsettled her. She moved to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. The house felt different tonight, full of echoes she hadn't heard in years. She wasn't thinking about enemies or airspace or tactical decisions. She was thinking about the weight of the truth she had spent so long burying. She heard the floorboard creak and looked up. Shaw stood at the open back door, hands in his pockets, eyes respectful. "Sorry," he said softly. "Didn't mean to startle you. You left your garage light on and I thought you might want to know." Bate breathed out, "You could have knocked." He smiled faintly. "I did twice, you didn't hear." She gestured toward the living room. "Hannah fell asleep. I didn't want to wake her." Shaw stepped inside, removing his shoes like someone taught to respect boundaries. "Big day tomorrow." "Yes." He studied her, the way she rubbed her thumb over the rim of her glass, the slight tremor in her shoulders, the exhaustion she tried to hide. "You're not afraid of speaking," Shaw said gently. "You're afraid of remembering." The truth hit harder than she expected. Bate looked down. "Memories are tricky." "They are," he agreed, "especially the ones tied to people we've lost." Her breath caught. She hadn't spoken David's name outside her home in years. She built a quiet, private shrine to him in her mind and learned to live around it. "You were with him during," Shaw paused, choosing his words with care, "during the crash." Bate stared at the countertop. "I was on the carrier." Her voice was soft, controlled. "I watched the radar go silent." Shaw nodded slowly. "I'm sorry." The silence between them felt heavy but not suffocating. He wasn't a man demanding answers. He wasn't trying to dissect her grief. He was simply there, present. Bate took a breath. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing, speaking tomorrow?" Shaw didn't answer immediately. He looked around her kitchen, the photographs taped to the fridge, Hannah's art projects, the calendar filled with school events and little hearts drawn on weekends. "You're not doing it for the crowd," he said finally. "You're doing it for her." Bate followed his gaze toward the living room, where Hannah slept peacefully. "You know," Shaw added, "in every briefing room I ever walked into there were two kinds of silence. The silence that hides fear and the silence that hides strength." Bate looked at him. "Yours," he said, "has always been the second kind." Her chest tightened unexpectedly, not with anxiety but with something closer to gratitude. Someone saw her, not the legend, not the lunch worker, not the widow. "Sorry." Bates set her glass down. "Thank you." Shaw nodded once. "If you need anything tomorrow, moral support, a steady face in the crowd." "I'll be okay," she said, surprising even herself. He smiled. "I know you will." He slipped his shoes back on and stepped toward the door, but before leaving he paused. "Bate." "Yes." "Tell the truth," he said. "They won't forget it." When he left, Bate locked the door, turned off the lights and sat near Hannah. She listened to the quiet rhythm of her daughter's breathing and let memories rise, uninvited, unburied. The carrier deck at dawn. The scream of engines. David's laugh cracking through comms. The night she heard the alarm and ran before she could think. The sickening silence that followed. Her hands trembled just slightly. She placed them on her knees, grounding herself. Tomorrow wasn't about being Lone Eagle again. It was about being Hannah's mother, one who didn't hide anymore. Morning arrived too quickly. Bate woke to Hannah nudging her gently. "Mom, today's the day." Bate smiled, brushing hair from Hannah's face. "Yes, today's the day." The school buzzed with unusual energy when they arrived. Teachers whispered. Students pointed. Something electric pulsed through the hallways, the kind that precedes an unexpected moment. Bate tried to ignore it. She wore simple clothes, black slacks, a clean blouse, hair neatly tied back. Nothing flashy, nothing military. She wanted her voice to speak louder than her appearance. But as she approached the auditorium doors, she felt dozens of eyes settle on her. Curiosity, respect, wonder. Angela appeared beside her. "Are you ready?" Bate let out a slow breath. "Yes." Inside, the auditorium was nearly full. Parents sat beside their children. Teachers lined the walls. The stage was decorated with flags and a large banner reading, "Veterans Day Assembly, honoring those who served." As Bate walked toward the front, she noticed the rows of young girls sitting together, talking, whispering, watching her with wide eyes that carried a mix of confusion and admiration. One of them pointed at her. Another smiled shyly. A third whispered something that made the others straighten their shoulders. Bate's step slowed. This is who she was speaking for. Not the adults. Not the skeptics. Not even Kevin's father, who now sat stiffly near the aisle. For the girls who needed to know what a woman could be. Principal Morgan stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady but warm. "Today, we have someone very special to share a story of service, courage, and sacrifice." She looked at Bate with genuine, unguarded respect. "Please welcome Bate Cooper." The applause rose like a wave, unexpected and overwhelming. Bate inhaled slowly, grounding herself, and walked to the stage. Her heart wasn't racing. It was steady. Steady like before a launch. Before the engines roared. Before she soared into a sky that could kill her. She reached the podium. Gripped the edges lightly. Waited for silence to settle. When the room quieted, she looked out at them. The children, the teachers, her daughter. And she asked softly, "Do you know what courage looks like?" 100 little faces leaned forward. "Most people think courage is loud," she continued. "Explosions, action, shouting commands, but that's not real courage, not the kind that matters." Her voice grew steadier. "Real courage is choosing to do the right thing, even when nobody sees you. It's choosing to protect someone even when you're scared. It's standing back up after life breaks you and saying, 'Not today.'" She paused. "Real courage looks like silence, right before you take a leap you can't take back." A teacher wiped her eyes discreetly. Shaw stood near the back, posture straight. Morgan listened like every word mattered. Bate continued. "I served in the United States Navy as a pilot. My call sign was Lone Eagle. I flew missions I didn't think I'd survive. I lost people I loved. I learned what fear really is and what pride really costs." Hannah watched her with a smile, so full it nearly broke Bates' composure. "But the bravest thing I ever did," Bates said softly, "wasn't in a cockpit." She looked directly at her daughter. It was becoming a mother. The room stilled. "Because courage," she said, "isn't just something you carry into battle. It's something you carry into life." She stepped back from the microphone slowly, the weight of the truth settling over the room like quiet thunder. For a moment, no one moved. Then the applause began. Not polite, not expected, but rising, strong, overwhelming, unstoppable. Children stood. Teachers stood. Parents stood. And Hannah, small, proud, glowing, jumped to her feet and clapped harder than anyone. Bate exhaled shakily. She didn't feel like Lone Eagle. She felt something deeper. Human. Seen. Whole. Why did the applause feel less like praise and more like a door swinging open after years of being locked? Bates stood there, overwhelmed not by the noise but by the meaning behind it. She didn't bask in it. She didn't smile broadly. She simply breathed, slowly, deliberately, as if her lungs were relearning what it meant to expand without restraint. When the assembly ended, students rushed forward in clusters. Little girls gathered at the edge of the stage, hesitant at first, then braver in small steps. "Mrs. Cooper, can girls really fly fighter jets? Did you wear the big helmet? Were you scared? Did you save people?" Bate knelt so she could meet them at eye level. She didn't give them the dramatic versions. She gave them the honest ones. Yes, girls can be pilots. Yes, the helmet was heavy. Yes, I was scared, everyone is. Yes, I helped people, and people helped me. Their eyes sparkled in the way only children's eyes can, full of wonder not yet tangled by cynicism. One little girl whispered, "I want to be like you." Bates smiled softly. "Be better than me, start there." Behind them, parents lingered with uncertain expressions. Some looked ashamed, some reverent, some simply unsure how to approach a woman they'd underestimated for years. Principal Morgan approached gently. "Bate, that was extraordinary." Bate stood, it was honest. That's what made it extraordinary. She noticed Shaw watching from a distance, not intruding, letting her have her space. He positioned himself like a guard, close enough to support, far enough to respect her independence. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Morgan asked. Bate nodded, passing Hannah off to Angela, who immediately wrapped the girl into a proud hug. They stepped aside near the auditorium's side door, where the noise softened into a distant hum. Morgan exhaled. "I owe you an apology." "You don't," Bates said quietly. "But I do," Morgan insisted. "I let you stay invisible because it was convenient for us, not for you. We never asked who you were. We assumed. And today you changed this school's narrative." Bate looked down. "I didn't want attention." "I know, that's why it's even more powerful." Morgan placed a hand over her heart. "Thank you." Bate nodded, humbled but uneasy with praise. As Morgan walked back into the crowd, Shaw finally stepped closer. "You did well," he said simply. "I didn't do anything remarkable." "You told the truth," Shaw replied. "That's more than most people manage." Bate looked away toward Hannah, now surrounded by classmates asking questions like she was suddenly the most interesting kid in school. Something warm flickered in Bates' chest. "You know," Shaw said softly, "that story you told about courage not being loud, you weren't speaking to the kids." Bate turned back. "You were speaking to yourself." The realization stilled her. Before she could respond, Kevin and his father approached. Kevin's small hands were clasped together nervously, his eyes flicking up and down like he wasn't sure how close he was allowed to stand. His father cleared his throat. "Mrs. Cooper, my son has something he wants to say." Kevin swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." The words tumbled out in one breath. "I didn't know you were really a pilot. I didn't know girls could be pilots. I didn't know anything." His voice cracked slightly, not with fear but with sincerity. Bate knelt again, meeting him eye to eye. "Thank you for saying that." Kevin looked down. "My dad said he was wrong too." Bates' eyes shifted to the man standing stiffly beside him. Kevin added, almost whispering, "And he said heroes don't always wear uniforms." Bate blinked, surprised by how much that sentence softened something in her. She placed a gentle hand on Kevin's shoulder. "Be kind from now on. That's the best apology you can give my daughter." He nodded vigorously. "I will." The father stepped forward. "Mrs. Cooper, Thank you for handling this with more grace than I deserved. Bate nodded once. Take care of your boy. They walked away. Shaw let out a long breath. You handled that better than most officers I know. I wasn't handling him, Bate said softly. I was protecting my daughter. Shaw smiled faintly. Same thing. By afternoon, the school returned to its usual rhythm, though something felt different, subtle, like the air had shifted. Teachers who once nodded politely now stopped her in hallways with genuine warmth. Students whispered excitedly as she passed. But it was Hannah's transformation that hit Bate the hardest. Her daughter walked differently, shoulders back, chin up, face glowing. At home, Hannah bounced into the living room after changing out of her school clothes. Mom, guess what? What? They want you to talk to the fifth-grade girls tomorrow about being a pilot. Bate raised an eyebrow. Do they now? Please say yes, Hannah begged. They were all talking about you. They said girls can do anything, and Mrs. Parker said she never knew any real pilots before. Bate placed her hand on her daughter's cheek. Sweetheart, speaking today was enough. We don't need to make this bigger. But Mom, Hannah whispered, you changed everything today. The words hit Bate harder than applause ever could. She sat down on the couch, pulling Hannah close. I did it for you. I know, Hannah murmured, and I'm proud of you. Bate laughed softly. I think it's my job to say that, not yours. But Hannah shook her head stubbornly. Nope, today it's my turn. It was strange, Bate realized, how the direction of strength could shift in a single moment. How a child's pride could anchor a mother better than any combat training ever could. That night, after Hannah fell asleep with her stuffed owl tucked under her chin, Bate sat alone on the porch under a sky full of quiet stars. She wasn't thinking about the medals locked away in a drawer. She wasn't thinking about the missions that still haunted her. She wasn't thinking about the applause. She was thinking about the way Hannah stood in the front row, hopeful, proud, changed. And Bate understood something she'd never articulated before. She didn't hide her past out of shame. She hid it because she'd given everything she had to the Navy, her strength, her youth, her heart. And when she finally walked away, she needed the world to leave her alone long enough for her to learn how to be a person again. A mother again. A human again. For years she believed she couldn't be both things at once, pilot and mother, warrior and gentle, strong and broken. Today proved otherwise. Today showed her she could be both. She heard the gate creak and looked up. Shaw walked in, hands in his pockets, eyes tired. Can't sleep either, he asked. Bate shook her head. Too many memories. He sat beside her, staring at the sky. Doesn't matter how many years pass, he said. Some missions stay with you. Bate nodded. Some losses too. Shaw hesitated, then spoke softly. Bate, about the operation you flew, the Lone Eagle Rescue. There's something I didn't say. Bate tensed slightly. What? Shaw turned toward her. One of the men you saved that day was my younger brother. Bate froze. Her heart stilled. Her breath caught. She stared at him, the truth sinking in like a stone dropping into the deep. Shaw's voice broke just slightly. So when I say thank you, it's not military courtesy. He looked away, jaw tight. It's personal. Bate didn't speak. Couldn't speak. The night air thickened around them, heavy with a meaning she wasn't prepared for. She had saved his brother. And he had carried that debt, that gratitude, that silent connection for years. Without knowing it, their lives had crossed long before this school, this hallway, this day. Bate looked at him, really looked. And for the first time since her husband died, she felt something unfamiliar flicker inside her. Not duty. Not guilt. Not grief. Possibility. What were the chances that the man who stood beside her now, quietly guarding her daughter's world, had once trusted her with his brother's life? Bate couldn't decide if it felt like fate or like a weight pressing against her ribs. She hadn't expected gratitude. She hadn't expected connection. She certainly hadn't expected this sudden, delicate shift inside her chest. Something warm, something she hadn't felt since before her world had collapsed in flames. Shaw didn't push the silence. He simply let it sit between them, respectful and heavy, like two veterans sharing a battlefield memory too sacred to unpack fully. Bate finally exhaled. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Shaw replied softly. "You didn't know." "But I remember the mission," she said, voice low, steady. "All of it. It's one of the ones that stayed." Shaw nodded. "He told me bits and pieces, enough to know you held the sky together that night." Bates stared at the wooden porch beneath her feet. "It wasn't heroic. It was desperation. I knew if I left those men, they'd die, and I couldn't accept that." Shaw looked over at her, something like understanding, deep, fatigued, familiar settling in his eyes. Heroism and desperation looked the same sometimes. Bate didn't answer. She wasn't used to compliments that weren't sharpened by expectation. She wasn't used to anyone knowing what she'd done without asking for more. "Your brother," she said slowly, "is he?" "Alive," Shaw answered. "Married, 2 kids, and he teaches flight theory now. Says he never forgot the sound of your engines cutting through the gunfire." Bate closed her eyes briefly, breath trembling. "I'm glad." "He wanted to meet you sooner," Shaw added. "But your file became smoke after you left. Hard to find ghosts." Bate almost smiled. "Almost. I wasn't trying to be a ghost." Shaw tilted his head slightly. "Weren't you?" She didn't answer. Because maybe she had been. Maybe disappearing had been easier than existing in the rubble of what she'd lost. She looked out at the quiet street, the dim glow of porch lights, the distant bark of a dog. "Why tell me now?" she asked. Shaw hesitated, then said, "Because today I saw you step back into the world, and it felt like the right moment." Bates swallowed. "I don't know if I'm ready for the world." "You don't have to be," Shaw said. "Just be ready for yourself." The words sank deeper than he probably intended. She opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of Hannah stirring inside broke the moment. Bates stood. "I should take her to bed." Shaw rose too, "Of course." Before he turned to leave, he paused again. "Bate, one more thing." She waited. "If you ever want to talk about anything at all, you know where to find me." Something flickered in his eyes. Not expectation, not obligation. "Permission." Bate nodded softly. "Good night, Colonel." He almost smiled. "Good night, Lone Eagle." She didn't correct him. "Not tonight." The next morning brought a strange calm. Not the numbness she used to feel after missions, but something gentler, like the world had shifted by a degree, and she was still adjusting to the new angle. At school, she noticed the change immediately. Students didn't stare, they smiled. Teachers didn't avoid her, they approached her, spoke to her like an equal, not an outsider holding a tray. Some thanked her. Some asked questions. Some simply looked at her with a depth she wasn't sure she deserved. She handled it all with quiet grace, but inside she felt something unfamiliar unraveling, a kind of acceptance she'd forgotten how to receive. During her lunch shift, children lined up differently, not rowdy, not dismissive. Respectful. A little girl approached the counter, eyes shining. "Mrs. Cooper, can I sit with Hannah today?" Bates smiled. "I think she'd like that." Another student chimed in. "My mom said you're the bravest person she's ever heard of." Bate glanced at the floor, overwhelmed. "Tell your mom thank you." When the lunch bell rang and students poured into the cafeteria, Bate scanned the room automatically. Habit, instinct, muscle memory. Her eyes landed on Hannah sitting at a crowded table, surrounded by kids who once ignored her. Hannah looked up and waved proudly. Bates' chest warmed. She wasn't used to warm. She wasn't used to easy. But she let the moment sit, let it settle, let it soften years of hardness she didn't know she was still carrying. After school, as Bates stacked trays and wiped down tables, Morgan approached with a hesitant smile. "You up for another moment of bravery?" Bate raised an eyebrow. "I think I used my quota this week." Morgan laughed. "We're organizing a mentorship group for girls interested in aviation and STEM. The teachers want you to lead it." Bate froze. Not out of fear. Out of disbelief. "I'm not a teacher," she said. "You don't need to be," Morgan replied. "You're something better, you're real." Bates' breath caught. "I don't know." "You don't have to decide today," Morgan said kindly. "Just consider it." Bate nodded and watched the principal walk away. Mentorship. Guidance. Girls looking to her. The thought unsettled her, not because she didn't want it, but because it asked her to step into a version of herself she'd left behind. She wasn't sure she could be both women at once. When she finished for the day, Bate walked Hannah to the parking lot. The sun dipped low, casting a warm gold over the concrete, turning the world soft. Hannah skipped ahead, then spun around. "Mom, guess what?" "What?" Bate asked, amused. "I told everyone you saved people, real people." Bate winced slightly. "Sweetheart." "They didn't believe me until Mrs. Parker said she checked the internet." Bate closed her eyes. "Oh no." "Mom, you're famous." "I'm very much not." "To me, you are," Hannah said simply. Bate knelt and pulled her close, hugging her tightly. "I love you, kid." "I love you too." As they walked toward the car, Shaw stepped out from behind his truck. He wasn't in uniform today, just jeans and a worn t-shirt, looking strangely normal for someone who carried the weight of rank and history. He lifted a hand. "Heading home?" "Yeah," Bates said. "Long day." "A good one." Bates smiled faintly. "Yes, a good one." Hannah ran ahead, leaving them a few steps behind. Shaw kicked lightly at a rock on the pavement. "I meant what I said last night. You don't owe anyone your story, but if you choose to share more, I'd listen." Bates studied him. He wasn't asking to know her. He was offering space. "There's something different about today," she said softly. "Yeah," Shaw replied. "You." She looked away, unsure how to respond. He didn't push. Instead, he said something simple, something that pulled at a place in her she rarely touched. "You don't have to be alone with your ghosts anymore." Bate exhaled slowly, feeling something shift inside her, something quiet and fragile but undeniably alive. "Maybe," she said, "I'm finally ready not to be." Shaw nodded, like he knew the weight of those words. "Good," he said softly, "because tomorrow I was hoping you'd have dinner with me, and my brother. He's been wanting to meet you for years." Bate blinked. Her throat tightened. Not fear. Not grief. Something else. She hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Shaw gave a small, gentle smile. "That's okay. I'll ask again another day." He stepped back, giving her space. No pressure, no expectation. Just a door left open. Bate watched him leave. And for the first time in years, she wanted to walk through a door instead of closing it behind her. She turned to Hannah, who waved excitedly from the car. A new life waited. Not loud. Not heroic. Not dramatic. Quiet. Steady. Possible. For the first time, possible. What did it mean to step toward a life you never thought you'd touch again? Bate wasn't sure. But the next morning she stood at the kitchen counter staring at her coffee, feeling the quiet hum of a world that suddenly seemed gentler. Not easier, never that, but gentler, like the air wasn't pushing against her chest anymore. Hannah sat at the table eating cereal, humming to herself. She paused and looked up. "Mom." "Yes." "Are you gonna say yes?" Bate blinked. "To what?" "To dinner," Hannah grinned mischievously. "With Colonel Shaw, you know he likes you right." Bate nearly choked on her sip of coffee. "Hannah." "What?" Hannah shrugged. "I'm not blind." Bate rubbed her forehead. "Sweetheart, I'm not. It's complicated." "Does everything have to be?" Hannah asked. The innocence of the question landed like a tiny stone with immeasurable weight. Bate swallowed hard. "Not everything," she admitted. Hannah's smile widened, and she returned to her cereal. Bate took a long breath and looked out the window at the quiet street. A year ago, she would have shut down the idea immediately. Too much grief, too many ghosts, too many pieces of herself she thought were unfixable. But now something had shifted. Not magically, not instantly, but undeniably. When they arrived at school, Bate felt the change in the air again. The children didn't whisper, they waved. Teachers didn't avoid eye contact, they smiled warmly. Even parents who once offered polite nods now approached her with sincerity. A mother stepped forward hesitantly. "Mrs. Cooper, my daughter talked about you all night. She said you made her feel powerful." Bates' heart tightened. "Thank you, that means more than you know." The woman nodded, eyes soft. "For what it's worth, we're lucky to have you here." Lucky. Bate didn't know how to hold that word without flinching, but she accepted it with a quiet thank you. Inside the cafeteria, everything looked the same, tables, trays, students lining up, but it felt different. There was respect now. There was recognition. More importantly, there was connection. The kind she'd been afraid to seek. The kind she'd convinced herself she didn't deserve. As lunch ended, Angela walked up with a warm grin. "A few girls asked if you talked to them after school. They want to know how to become pilots." Bate laughed softly. "Word travels fast." "Only when it's worth hearing," Angela replied. Bate hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, after school." Angela's eyes brightened. "They'll be thrilled." Bate wasn't sure she was ready, but she knew the girls were, and maybe that was enough. That afternoon, 5 girls waited in the library, nervously fidgeting with notebooks and pencils. Bate stepped inside, unsure what to say. She wasn't used to teaching. She wasn't used to guiding. But then one girl, small and shy, whispered, "Mrs. Cooper, do you think someone like me could be a pilot?" And suddenly Bate knew exactly what to say. She sat with them on the carpeted floor, knees crossed, hands open. "I think someone like you," she said softly, "could do anything you choose, but you have to choose it for you, not for anyone else." Their eyes widened. Bate continued, speaking slowly, steadying her voice with memories she once tried to bury. "When I was younger, people told me I wasn't strong enough, or fast enough, or tough enough. They told me the world wasn't built for girls like me." A girl near the back frowned. "That's not fair." "It wasn't," Bate agreed. "But the thing about the world is, you don't have to accept the shape it gives you. You can make your own." They listened, with an intensity that made her chest ache. "You don't need a call sign to be brave," Bate said. "You don't need a cockpit to be powerful. Courage starts long before you ever touch a jet." "Where does it start?" one girl asked. Bate smiled slightly. "Inside, quietly, the same way storms begin." By the time the meeting ended, the girls left the library walking taller. Bate watched them go and felt something unexpected and humbling settle into her bones. Purpose. Not the kind tied to missions or orders. Not the kind measured in medals or flight hours. A softer purpose. A human one. She stepped outside into the cool afternoon breeze and found Shaw waiting near the school's entrance, hands in his pockets, eyes calm. "You were in the library," he said. "Not a question, just an observation." "Yes," Bate answered. "Girls wanted to talk." "How'd it go?" Bate hesitated, searching for the right words. It felt right. Shaw nodded. "Good." They stood in a comfortable silence until he glanced toward the parking lot. "So dinner," he said gently without pressure. If you're not ready, that's okay. Bate studied him, saw the patience, the quiet steadiness, the man who didn't treat her like a symbol or a burden or a legend. Just a woman finding her footing. Would it be just us? Bate asked. Shaw shook his head lightly. Not this time, I meant what I said. My brother wants to meet you. He should be the first. Bate's heart tightened, not painfully but with the weight of memory. Meeting someone you saved is complicated, she whispered. It can be, Shaw agreed. But sometimes it heals things you didn't know were still wounded. She thought about that. The silent hanger in her heart. The ghost she'd carried. The night sky she'd left behind. She wasn't healed. She wasn't whole. But she was no longer shattered. Bate took a slow breath. Okay. Shaw blinked. Okay. Yes, she said, firmer now. I'll meet him. A faint smile tugged at his lips, surprised, grateful, gentle. He's going to be honored. Bate looked at the sky, wide, open, clear, and felt something lift inside her. Maybe I am too, she admitted. Shaw stepped closer, not invading, not claiming, just standing near enough to remind her she wasn't alone. When? She asked. Tomorrow evening, he said. I'll pick you both up. Both. Hannah should come. She deserves to see the kind of men her mother saved. Bate swallowed. She'd like that. They stood together in the golden light, unhurried, steady. Something unspoken, something small but growing, bridged the space between them. Not romance. Not yet. Possibility. Warm, patient, possible. That night, after Hannah fell asleep, Bate walked out to the porch again. She stared up at the sky, dark and deep and endless. She thought about the woman she used to be. The pilot. The warrior. The ghost. She thought about the woman she'd become. The mother. The protector. The one learning to be whole again. And she realized something she had never fully understood. She didn't have to choose between the two. She could be both. She was both. And maybe the world was finally ready to see her that way. She breathed deeply, letting the night settle around her. She was no longer hiding. No longer running. No longer shrinking herself to fit a smaller life. She was stepping forward, slowly, courageously, imperfectly. Toward connection. Toward healing. Toward a future she never expected. And somewhere in the quiet, she understood the moral she had lived her entire life without naming. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And sometimes it rises again quietly on the wings you thought you lost forever.